joining and joining us today for this event on attracting investment in rural areas, lessons from Indigenous communities. We'll be discussing the involvement of Indigenous communities in large developments across resources, including mining, forestry, and energy, in real estate, utilities projects, and other large developments. And this includes how communities can best finance these projects and the involvement of Indigenous businesses, particularly through organisational capacity building. We're joined in person by Mark Podlasly, who's CEO of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition in Canada, and we're really excited to hear his insights today. And I'll now hand over to Gloria Wiseman, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada to the OECD, and then Dorothy Alain Dupre, who's the Head of Division for Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance at the OECD, to provide some welcome remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I want to firstly thank the OECD Secretariat for the opportunity to join today's discussion and to make a few remarks. The Government of Canada values the collaboration we have had with the OECD over the past several years to better include Indigenous perspectives in their agenda, particularly the important work undertaken by the Centre of Entrepreneurship, SMEs, regions, and cities on linking Indigenous communities with regional development, and the publication of a synthesis report and case studies on Canada, Sweden, and Australia as part of that project. This research has helped inform and guide Canada's own evolving policy approach to economic reconciliation and has been referenced by Indigenous partners in the development of their own economic strategies. Canada remains firmly committed to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, grounded in a renewed nation-to-nation, Inuit to Crown, and government-to-government relationship, and based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. As part of Canada's ongoing implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, we are collaborating with Indigenous partners to identify actions that Canada can take to advance economic reconciliation. By supporting self-determined economic priorities, we will contribute to improving economic outcomes for Indigenous peoples and for Canada's peoples as well overall. From major infrastructure projects to clean energy, Indigenous communities and institutions across Canada are driving forward the next generation of sustainable, inclusive growth. Organizations like the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, whose CEO will speak at today's event, Mark Podlasly, who I had the pleasure of just recently meeting, has been really instrumental in shaping a new model for equitable partnership, one that centers on Indigenous values, promotes shared prosperity, and builds long-term resilience in our economy. I also was pleased to learn that we have two other Canadian Indigenous leaders here to speak today. I'm pleased to have Derek Archibald, Deputy Chief of Tewa Tagamu Nation, and Will Sayers here, CEO of Zagamok Enterprises, to share their knowledge and experience. As we move forward, Canada will continue to support Indigenous-led and Indigenous-informed economic policy, evidence, and engagement, both domestically and internationally. We see critical opportunities to develop dialogue, co-develop solutions, and promote Indigenous leadership across the economic landscape, including through continued collaboration with the OECD and partners around the world. So again, thank you very much for this invitation to participate in this important meeting, and I look forward to hearing the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Good afternoon to all. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Good afternoon to all in the room and online, of course. Thank you, Gloria, for your introduction and for the continuous support of Canada to CFE and to the OECD work on Indigenous communities. We are very happy to welcome in person Mark Podlasly, CEO of the First Nations Major Project Coalition. Mark is playing a leading role in Canada for greater economic participation for member nations in major infrastructure and economic projects across Canada. Mark has also been very supportive of the OECD and CFE's stream of work on Indigenous community and a key partner in our recent conference in Sudbury in Canada. So thank you very much, Mark, for being with us today. We are also very happy to have online a fantastic panel of speakers from Brazil and Canada. As Bridget mentioned, our speakers today will share their experiences of organizational capacity building, entrepreneurship, and Indigenous investment in large developments such as natural resource projects. To start the discussion, I just would like to remind you that across the OECD, 14 member countries have Indigenous population totaling around 38 million people, with 44% living in rural regions. Indigenous people make vital cultural, environmental, and economic contributions. Yet they continue to face significant well-being gaps, including higher poverty rates and life expectancy up to 20 years lower than non-Indigenous population. This highlights the importance of increasing economic participation. CFE has prioritized Indigenous-focused work over the past 10 years, supported by the Regional Development Policy Committee and the Working Party on Rural Policy. CFE developed the first cross-cutting report to support Indigenous development with the report that was mentioned previously, linking Indigenous communities to regional development in 2019 and case studies in Canada, Australia, and Sweden. We have organized multiple dialogues on various relevant topics to Indigenous communities over the past 6 years. And in parallel, we have a strong focus on Indigenous well-being through the OECD Mining Regions and Cities initiative that has led to the Indigenous call to action delivered at our last 2024 mining conference in Sudbury in Canada. We will continue this discussion at our upcoming conference in Lapland, Finland, this June. So for today's workshop, I just would like to briefly focus on the two topics that we will discuss. The first, we will focus on financing Indigenous involvement in major projects. Access to capital, we know, is a key barrier to Indigenous equity participation in major resource projects. Many communities lack collateral, credit history, or investment readiness due to exclusion from financial systems. Indigenous groups have been pioneering co-ownership and community ownership models, shifting from benefit sharing to full participation. Organizations like the First Nations Major Project Coalition in Canada play a very important role by offering financial advisory services, legal support, and policy advocacy to enable Indigenous equity participation in large-scale projects. So we look forward to hearing insight from Mark and from Derek Archibald, which can be very inspiring for many countries beyond Canada to remove barriers in access to capital. The second topic for today will be Indigenous governance and organizational capacity building. We will focus on strengthening business engagement with major projects. We know that strong Indigenous organizations are critical enablers of successful participation in projects in rural areas, acting as economic development cooperation, land councils, trust managers, negotiators, and service providers. Organizational capacity challenges can include limited access to skilled staff, administrative infrastructure, governance systems, and financial tools, especially in remote rural areas. Training, mentoring, partnership model help grow organizational capacity, including programs focused on business management, governance, legal and financial literacy, and project evaluation. Government policy play a critical role through funding for Indigenous-led institutions, clear frameworks for negotiation, and setting incentives for Indigenous procurement and partnership. So in this session, in the second session, we will be hearing from our panelists, Ismaël Nobre and Will Sayers. Thank you again very much to our panelists, to Mark for being with us, and for all of you in the room and online, and we really look forward to your insights in the discussion. And without further ado, I will turn to Mark for his presentation. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. And it is a pleasure to be here in Paris today with all of you here in the room and online. As you heard, my name is Mark Podlasly. My ancestral name is Tatsha, and I'm a member of the Ntlaka'am First Nation, which is a community in British Columbia, the far western province in Canada near the Pacific. We are located 300 kilometers east of the city of Vancouver. And as you also heard, I am the CEO of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. The coalition is a nonprofit. I am not sharing it. No, not to Zoom. No, I have slides. You cannot have a presentation without slides.
Yeah.
I thought I was in there. Oh, I see. Here we go.
Sure.
Okay. I thought I was all ready to go. Share. So the First Nations Major Projects Coalition is a coalition of 175 First Nations or Indigenous communities across Canada in every time zone. The coalition started approximately 10 years ago to exactly the problem you heard, is the access to capital, or rather the access to affordable capital. Indigenous people in Canada, because of legislative changes or legislation that was put in place in the 1800s, we are barred from accessing the financial institutions like every other Canadian citizen. The difference is that our assets, our lands, our personal property is all held in trust by the federal government for our use. This puts a challenge is that we then have no assets, even though we have land and we have property. We just can't use it as collateral. So what happened in British Columbia approximately 10 years ago, and that's the province there on the far left side of the screen in the north, there were a number of nations there, 11, had negotiated an equity position, which meaning they had to come up with the money to invest in a $5 billion natural gas pipeline. It was astounding that they had negotiated that, but what they found is that they went to the financial institutions to access capital. They could not. So they lost the opportunity. Those 11 nations thought this is going to happen again. We need our own organization to help us overcome not only the barrier of accessing capital, but the other questions around how do you commercially come together in communities of 11 along a linear corridor of 1,000 kilometers. There are other questions too about corporate governance. So they started the coalition. And the idea is that we as a organization would be founded. We would have Indigenous people talented in legal, financial, technical expertise. And the initial challenge was how to raise capital at an affordable rate. We started our progress working towards a federal government loan guarantee, which would allow lower the cost of capital for projects like this. As time went on, other First Nations or communities in Canada started to be approached by different proponents in everything from mining, natural gas pipelines, geothermal power, solar power, wind power, transmission lines. And what happened is that those members asked to join the coalition. So now you have on the screen there 175 communities. These are the First Nations of Canada. There are 620 approximately across the country. 175 are part of our organization. Every one of these spots on the Canadian map have an opportunity they wish to co-invest. They wish to invest in the country, but they all have the same problem. How do you access capital? How do you access the technical expertise to make this happen? So over time, the coalition has formed, and we provide as a nonprofit, the expertise to Indigenous people in Canada to come to a negotiating table to negotiate better environmental outcomes and economic opportunities. We are now supporting, I'm going to change the slide here. I'm trying to change the slide. There we go. Oops. You'd think I know how to use a slide deck, even though I'm in, there we go. So these are the projects that we're supporting at this point. There's 19 projects with total capital expenditure of $48 billion Canadian. These projects are projects that nations are now starting to negotiate equity options for. And again, I wish to stress, these are not grants or gives by the company. They are equity investments by the nations. I won't read them all to you. You can see them there running from east to west. But they run the gambit from things we talked about in hydrogen on both coasts now, geothermal energy, lithium, which is critical minerals, infrastructure like new passenger rail systems. Canada right now has a backlog of projects that it wishes to approve. Another issue that the coalition is starting to address is how do we speed up regulatory approvals? Regulatory approvals in Canada has given us a bit of a reputation of being a slow place to get investments improved. we as First Nations have taken the approach that if you have Indigenous partners in these projects as capital investors, you essentially turn the Indigenous parties into co-proponents. And if you're a co-proponent, it's in our vested interest to ensure that the regulatory approvals happen faster. Canada has endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And in that, there are clauses that call for the free, prior, informed consent of Indigenous people and anything that would affect our rights. And in Canada, from a commercial perspective, that co-proponent perspective makes it very easy to proceed with the project, because if you're a co-proponent, you have given consent. It's the purest form of consent, demonstrated consent. So those projects right now across the country, they are speeding up in the number that are coming to us, because if you've been watching the news lately, Canada and the United States are having a bit of a disagreement around the sovereignty of our country. It is important for the country now to diversify its exports. 70% go to the United States right now. We need to speed that out to other places like Europe or Asia or other markets. As Indigenous people, we are well aware that we have an important role to ensure that Canada's sovereignty is strengthened by diversifying our markets, and we want to be part of that. On our website, fnmpc.ca, you will find reports. These are the reports, and I'll just give you a sample of them, of the projects that were listed before in the details. Some of them are listed as confidential because we do sign non-disclosure agreements with some of the companies, but you will find them all in here. And they run the gamut, as I mentioned, from clean energy to critical minerals to infrastructure. Another area that has come up as interest for Indigenous people in Canada is nuclear. Canada has Saskatchewan as a province, and much of the world's uranium comes from there. Also, First Nations generally host these facilities, and soon you will hear about nuclear waste repositories that are being accepted by some First Nations. So those reports online, or those documents that you see there and others at fnmpc.ca will explain the work that we're doing. I would like to also share that we publish online reports for our members about projects, information of interest, to prepare them to come to the table. I am having the hardest time with my computer today. There we go. No, there we go. You'll also find under the Tools and Resources tab of our website dozens of reports like these that explain to our members what are the opportunities in net zero transition. You will find reports on critical minerals, why they're used, what's the market, what's the opportunity. Regulated rate utilities like electric lines, gas transmission, how does capital flow and how do capital markets work? And we encourage you, for those of you on this web today, is to go to the website and take them, use them, share them. All of these reports are accessed by our members, and what it does is it allows them to explain to their membership why they're getting involved in something and inform them in very easy to understand language what's at stake for them as communities or what's at risk. Because we are an Indigenous-led organization, we generally do not take we're agnostic in projects. We don't take a side on whether a project is good or bad. It's up to the community to make that decision. But we will provide all the information in the concept of free, prior, informed decision-making. The consent still comes from the nations. So those are online, dozens more. Another thing that we do is annually we host a conference where we bring in the best examples we can find in Indigenous and corporate and governments working together to build projects to improve the livelihood of Indigenous communities and people. These are some of the pictures from our last conference. Our conferences now attract over 1,700 people, and they generally are 1/3 Indigenous, 1/3 government, and 1/3 corporate. The pictures you see there, for example, on the upper right side, is a delegation from Australia, where there was a project, a 62 gigawatt green hydrogen production facility that would have included 3,000 wind turbines, 25 million solar panels, and when complete would be the largest exporter of green hydrogen in the world to Asia. That was initiated by an Australian First Nation. They found the partners and they still retained a 10% equity stake in the project. That was astounding. In New Zealand, we've had speakers come who explained about how their geothermal plants, in some cases 50% co-owned with utilities in New Zealand, provide up to 6% of the national energy to the country. We've had numerous companies now in Indigenous communities and companies approaching us from Australia, New Zealand. This year it was from Latin and South America and the United States, who will come to our conference to be inspired, and if you're a business or government, to be challenged about doing things faster. And this is Indigenous-led. Last year's conference keynote speaker was the USA Bank of America CEO. This year, we will have the CEO of BHP Minerals from Australia, as well as Canadian CEOs from Canadian National Rail and Hydro-Quebec, one of the largest power utilities in the country. We will also have a former Prime Minister Harper, speaking on our stage. Again, the concept here is that Indigenous people want to be part of the major economy, and we intend to do it as full partners. And that means co-investing. That's the mission of the coalition. So that is the coalition. We are Indigenous-led. We are about 35 Indigenous professionals across the country who come to bring our skills that we have gained outside, either in industry or in education. We include youth where we can, because this is where the next generation will be taking after we are gone. We are very much focused on Indigenous cultural values first. Our conferences are highly cultural, but at the same time, we see ourselves as eminently practical. If a nation comes to us and wants to be a participant in a nickel mine or a geothermal power station or in wind solar power farms or hydrogen export facility, we will do our best to bring them the best examples, the best data, and get them prepared to be informed so they can make a decision that will affect not only their community, but the well-being of Canada and the economy overall.
Thank you, Mark, for a very interesting presentation. I'm sure there are people online with many questions. If you do have a question, please feel free to post it in the chat. We'll also have a Q&A session a bit later on where you can ask over the microphone as well. So now we'll move on to our second panelist, Derek Archibald, who is Deputy Chief for Tagami Nation in Canada. So sorry for the pronunciation. I'm sure that's incorrect, but please let us know how to pronounce it and take it away, Derek.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for sorry, it's pronounced Tagami Nation. But yeah, thank you for the invitation for today's presentation. Definitely an important conversation. Happy to share some insights, as a leader and, someone that was part of or well understands the barriers of participating in these projects. So I got a quick slide deck I prepared. So let's run through that. All right. Yeah, so thank you. At the beginning, as any other community, we did face a significant barriers. We were excluded from the early conversations around the development. We lacked access to the capital and, just encountered a lot of skepticism about our ability to participate in the projects. Despite this, we remained committed and, definitely learned a lot. We had to go back and, strengthen our internal governance, secured financing, through persistent engagement. We looked at developing new structures internally, developing development corporations as special purpose vehicles for investments. And, this helped us claim a rightful place at the table. So, it's obvious that, across Canada, there's a lot of development happening in a lot of the communities. Projects keep advancing across our lands, but, we were left out of the planning and funding. That exclusion was a wake-up call. You know, we had to lead within, and this blueprint is a result of that shift. One of our first challenges was financial credibility. We didn't have the consistent audits or internal reporting that gave us leverage. We addressed this by working with, our advisors, training our administration, and aligning our leadership with long-term nation building strategies. And early on, we had a lot of internal division amongst the community, questions about direction and building up trust. We overcame this by, engaging our community members, youth, elders, offers their voices, and entrepreneurs. It wasn't easy, but, building unity meant building legitimacy. Yeah, we were offered benefit agreements that looked good on paper, but gave us no voice. It was more of a passive investment, or more transactional opposed to, meaningful agreements. We started to say no. Instead, we fought for equity. We took risks, negotiated hard, and leaned on legal and financial expertise. Eventually, we secured real ownership with real revenue sharing. We faced a readiness gap. Not enough trained workers, limited business infrastructure. We responded by launching training programs, hiring locally, growing our own companies to meet the need. These turns into challenges, eventually turn into jobs and self-sufficiency. When funds began to flow, the next challenge was discipline. We didn't want a short-term spend. We created policies and community priorities around housing, education, culture, entrepreneurship, making sure every dollar worked is for the next generation. Because we built it with our rights, our people, and our systems, this model creates trust, stability, and shared value for governments, investors, and most importantly, our community. Every stream has its own challenges: governance, unity, ownership capacity, reinvestment. But we didn't give up. Braided together, these efforts created a strong enough to carry us forward. Whatever your starting point, don't wait. Look within your nation. Ask the hard questions about control and equity. Reclaiming starts with belief and builds with bold discussions. We're living proof that it could be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Now we'll move on to the second topic of the webinar, which is on Indigenous organisational capacity building and strengthening business engagement with major projects. So to start us off, we have Ismael Nombre, who's the Executive Director at Amazonia 4.0.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning for those who are in the South Hemisphere or in nearby where I am. I'm in a further location in the Amazon region, working in a project that I will present part of it for you now. And to start our conversation, I will present some slides. Let me share my screen. Okay, well, I'm not indigenous myself, although I have ancestors that were indigenous in Brazil. And I run the Amazonia 4.0, a nonprofit, a non-governmental institution based in the Amazon in Manaus. And we work on a dimension for Amazon biome conservation, we are very close to have a tremendous disruption in the ecological and hydrological systems that sustain the forest alive. And we endeavor efforts to change the rationale of land use, development, and inclusion of marginalized people, where sometimes indigenous are living this far from ideal conditions, even in a land that is very rich in itself. So I will talk about the case I will bring you is the Paiter Surui, Amazonian indigenous people high-tech chocolate factory. Before we start talking about the project itself, it's good to understand the dimensions I said we work with, which is to empower local people, the traditional communities people, and the indigenous people in making more of the resources they manage in the forest, the forest resource. Usually, these people I'm depicting in the slides, which is the riverine dwellers, the Quilombolas people, where I am now working a project, which is the second from left from right, right from left. The agrarian reform settlers that were sent to the Amazon to colonize in the 70s and 80s during our military dictatorship period, and the extractivist people who live in protected areas that are crafted to have this traditional people to live forever, extracting resources without taking the forest, and the indigenous people. So we empower these people to move on from raw material suppliers to value chains that becomes very rich value chains outside the Amazon and with other actors that doesn't dialogue with the local people. So it creates wealthy for others. So we want to invert this, making the value aggregation to happen right where they live, nearby the forest they sustainably managed. And how do we think it's possible? It's hard to do value aggregation. It means processing products to the final product that the consumers will pay for. So we find out that if you use high technology resources to help to assist in this value aggregation, which means smart manufacturing or Industry 4.0, like it's known in Europe, which is revolutionizing the production sectors everywhere. If we could bring this as a tool for them, we would be able to do amazing things right where they live in this unlikely place to have quality products, fine products being developed. And a good case for this is what the project we are running together with the Paiter Surui people. The Paiter Surui people live in this indigenous land that is marked. And you can see how different it is where an indigenous people manage the environment and the outsiders, the settlers, which is in the lower left and bottom of the picture. All these greenish places in the right side and top are other indigenous lands. So we want to give the indigenous people better opportunities to make their life in a much higher quality than usually it's conceded to them, including them in an economy that is of value aggregation products with added value. So and it's somehow some way to pay back to give some good things back of the amazing ecosystem services they can provide just for having a culture that has better fundaments about how we deal with nature, how we treat nature. But to work with the indigenous people, as I said, we are not an indigenous institution ourselves. We began a partnership with the UMIAB, which is the Union of the Indigenous Women in the Brazilian Amazon, to build together, not Amazonia 4.0 Institute to telling them how to do what to do, but to build together solutions based on science, innovation, technology, and mainly ancestor knowledge that they have, and they can provide this to make a real new path to develop the Amazon. So we have this first meeting with 27 indigenous people from 12 ethnic groups, together with scientists from the main scientific institution in Brazil, mostly women and ourselves. And the objectives were to build participatory solutions and experience for structuring forest conservation policies and containment of climate change from the ancestral perspective of traditional communities. The event was a success, and we started establishing pathways and frameworks, how we could put it to work on real scenarios. So this is how the event ended. And so the first case, the first outcome of this partnership between OR and indigenous institutions is this biofactory 4.0, because it's full field of high technology, Cupuaçu cocoa. Cupuaçu is an Amazonian fruit that is very different externally, but internally is very similar to cocoa. And with the seeds, the Cupuaçu seeds, we can do something that's very, very similar to chocolate. So we put together these two fruits. Cocoa, as you know, it's a plant that's originated in the Amazon. Ancestrally, it was an Amazonian fruit. Then it was taken for many places in the world. So the first biofactory for the production of chocolate in an indigenous land, as far as we know, in the world. It's the first time indigenous will produce not any chocolate, the finest chocolate you can find. And the Paitersurui people live in a place where cocoa is plenty in the forest, and they are cultivating more, managing the forest to have more yield. They live in the Rondônia state in the Brazilian Amazon. So they will make this chocolate of origin directly from their hands, and the transformed equipments by technologies that facilitates production. That's the key words. With technology, we can enable people, not only indigenous people, as I said, many riverine people, traditional community people, to make things that usually only in the top industry it would be able to. That's a computer depiction. It's made out of IA, let me be clear, but it will become very similar to what you were saying. And the longitudinal profile of the factory. Outside is just one more indigenous construction, and inside a very modern 4.0 chocolate factory with all these hygiene aspects taking cover, the automated machine, just an example of how this high technology is enable local people and indigenous people to be part of a much more sophisticated economy. The equipment, they are smart equipment, so they can talk. They can talk about what is happening with the production, alerts, information, prompts about what to do next. And they can do it in any language, including any of the native languages in Brazil, which are about 300 different native languages. So it make anyone, even if they don't speak Portuguese, which is the official language in Brazil, to familiarly run the production in their indigenous land. It's an initiative from the Game Blay, which is an association, Metareilá, of the Suruí indigenous people. In the development of the project is under responsibility of Amazonia 4.0, the nonprofit, non-governmental organization I'm director. The project has 5 steps, which is assembling this modern biofactory, training the people to operate the machines and the production steps, a marketing and product prototyping, where the product will not only be a good chocolate to eat, but a cultural experience for the consumer. They will. It's much like the indigenous people giving, hand giving the chocolate for the consumer. They will become aware of all realities and knowledge and histories about what mean that product that came from the forest, with the respect that the indigenous people usually have about this natural realms. And the production walkthrough, where an expert will stay many months working together, and then passing the factory to the indigenous control. And the business and organization support. It's a 2 years project, and this support is another project we are running to become permanent, to become a system, a remote system for support, multidimensional support, to be something permanent. The project investment it's in course $1 million. The production yield is about 60 tons of chocolate per year. The gross revenue of the factory will be about 3 million per year after the year 3. And the governance business is 100% owned and run by an indigenous social company or cooperative. We only provide the factory and the knowledge to run that, which is our knowledge. It has their own knowledge also. It's ancestral knowledge that's very important for this business, but something that are not indigenous, we provide to them. The project sponsor is Grupo Carrefour Brazil, a French-owned company, and the equipment is supplied by FBM, the Ford Boscolo Machines, an Italian chocolate machinery company. So it's just a good point about how this project is based on international cooperation and involvement, with room for much deeper cooperation under OECD's mandates and objectives. So we would like to go much further on approximating Europe and other countries to create this solution that not only respond to Amazon necessities, but also many places where indigenous people and forests are threatened in many ways. And I have here a message from the Paiter Suruí to the partners of the project.
Carrefour Amazônia 4.0 kadê ami tama projeto mga eka ete.
Well, if you, like myself, are not understanding one word they are saying, it's okay. They are speaking on Paiter Suruí language, which is their own very own language. So I asked them to talk again in Portuguese, and I put subtitles for all of us.
Quero parabenizar e agradecer ao Grupo Carrefour por essa iniciativa de apoiar um projeto inovador igual essa. Porque isso, com certeza, vai trazer um resultado muito positivo da sustentabilidade da floresta e fortalecendo um povo indígena economicamente. Isso também, com certeza, também vai ajudar que a sociedade não indígena possam entender que parceria com instituições privadas e povos indígenas possam dar certo para combater as mudanças climáticas a partir das suas atitudes de apoiar a sustentabilidade. E por isso, mais uma vez aqui, agradecer realmente o Grupo Carrefour pela essa iniciativa e compreensão de apoiar esse projeto inovador.
Bom, we have just listened Almir Surui, the Aiter Surui chief, just sending a message to our sponsor, and so we expected to have this factory ready in October, just before the COP30 in Brazil, to showcase this as a good solution to think about when we think the long run in forest conservation. Just make it have a better participation in the economy, and a participation that is aligned with the ecosystem needs, the humanity needs, which is a balanced climate and a balanced earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ismail, for sharing with us a really interesting initiative. Now we'll move to Will Sayers, who is CEO of Zagamok Enterprises, to share his presentation before the Q&A. Please go ahead, Will.
Okay. 1 second. Sorry, I don't see the, oh, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, so I'm Will Sayers. I'm the CEO of Zagamok Enterprises, Inc. Zagamok Enterprises is the business arm of Sagamok Anishinabek. Sagamok is a community, an Indigenous community. It's about 100 kilometers west of Sudbury, Ontario. Sudbury, Ontario is known for its rich history in mining, and continues to have many mines in the area. It's a huge component for the economy in Canada. So what you see here is Zagamok Enterprises Inc. Our subsidiaries includes Zagamok Construction, Zagamok Legend Mining, OCL Quarrying and Crushing, and Zagamok Stuart Olson. So quick company overview. Zagamok Enterprises Inc. We're 100% owned by Sagamok Anishinabek, focusing on maximizing economic development opportunities in the resource sector and related construction services within our traditional lands. Our vision, it's really, we exist to contribute to Sagamok's foundation of Minubi Modswin, which means the good life. The community itself, Sagamok, they have about 3,400 members, the people that belong to the community, and close to 2,000 live within the community itself. Our mission, to deliver a comprehensive range of valued services to the natural resources, construction, and infrastructure industries, with strong emphasis on health and safety and protecting the environment. We create multi-generational opportunities, which is big for us. We want to be longer term and really benefit the community. So a little bit of our company history. It says the timeline shows 2012, but really it started in 2006. That is when the chief at the time, Paul Scott, again, he received a a closure plan for a mine, for Tot Mine. It was on his desk. So he didn't really know what to do with it at the time. Kind of started working with his people and with the valet who owns Tot Mine at the time, and they began negotiating an impact benefit agreement. So this would have been the first one that Sagamok was ever involved in, even though the mining has happened for over 100 years in Sudbury. The community really hasn't really participated in it until within the last 10 years. So it took 6 years to negotiate that contract, and in 2012, that's when they signed the IBA. There was also some other negotiations going on at the same time with FNX Mining, which is now KGHM International. That was signed in 2015 for an additional impact and benefit agreement. And in response to that, to these opportunities that were stemming, there's contracting provisions in those agreements. They created Scummuck Enterprises, and this was in 2014. I actually started working for the company just shortly after that. And then in 2015, we kind of secured our first contract, just doing a janitorial services at the mine. It's their main administrative office, and so we had about 12 janitors working within that building, and that was our first real contract and exposure to the procurement process, working with valet. There's a little gap there between 2015 and 2019. But what happened during this time period is when we kind of went through the model of creating these partnerships with industry, with different companies. I found we created a lot of them, but a few of them were actually really beneficial to us in gaining capacity. Part of the negotiations with the valet included some specific contracts, which includes ore haulage, so hauling of the ore. So we worked with a company that performed those contracts for us, and they hired members, and they also hired private trucking brokers. So what really kind of set us up for this model was, we had to kind of look inward at the community and see where did we want to go with this business. Are we happy having other businesses do the work, and they can hire people from the community, and we get a share of the revenue, or did we want to do the work ourselves, which was ultimately what we were interested in. Where the skill sets came in from the community, we kind of looked at what was available. A lot of the people were involved in forestry in their past, so they brought skills from operating equipment, and a lot of them were hauling logs for those forestry companies. But that industry kind of tanked around that time, and they were kind of looking. It was a nice smooth transition to working for the mines and hauling ore. A lot of the members owned their own trucks, so they were hired to put on these contracts to haul ore from a mine to the smelter in Sudbury. So that partnership worked for us. And then in 2019 is when we actually created our own construction company, Scummuck Construction LP. June 1st is a very important date for us. It was that was when we hauled our first ton of ore, and things really took off from there. We started with, when I started, we probably had a few administrative people, and then the 10 to 12 janitors, and then today I think we're over. I'll get to it later on, but we're probably around 157 people. I think was the list as of last month in our company. In 2023, we did our first strategic acquisition. We acquired OCL Custom Crushing and Quarrying. It's they're specialized in crushing of aggregates, gravel, sand and gravel. And then last year we acquired majority interest in Legend Mining, which is a underground mining contractor. So I know I only had 10 minutes, so I'll try to race through kind of our capabilities quickly. So 2019, that's when we started Skomak Construction to carry out the contracting opportunities stemming from the IBA. Some of our services, we do haulage, a lot of it's civil construction. We do site services work, which includes road maintenance, dust suppression, snow removal. We supply aggregates and then janitorial services. Our current overall fleet, we have over 200 pieces of heavy equipment now, where we started with probably 4. I think it was our first purchases. We have 31 loaders. They range from 12,000 to 115,000 pounds. 34 heavy truck dump trucks and pup trailers. So include also tractors and live bottom trailers, equipment floats, service trucks, water trucks. We have dozers, 8 rock trucks, 21 excavators, and then a bunch of crushing and screening equipment. Some of the projects we've worked on, I'm just leading off with some. These are some projects we've done within the community, and we've done these ones for, I guess we call them in kind. We did them for free. It helps, some of the downtime during in between contracts. We can keep people employed and give back to the community that owns us, I guess. So we did some work at there's a fall harvest site, a lot of clearing and leveling. We did built a gazebo and picked up this area called West Point. It's more of a beach area. We revitalized 2 ballparks within the community, also a skateboard, a youth center park, I was pretty proud of that, the work done there. We did some work in the Powell grounds. We also did some, more commercial work. They built a brand new school the last couple of years. We did all the site preparation there. We also did site preparation at a new industrial park and provided some winter sand, did some road improvements and gravel crushing. Valley Totten Mine, this is where we got started. These contracts we currently do there include the ore and waste haulage, the road maintenance, the janitorial. We provide the sand backfill. They take out the ore and we got to backfill it with a specialized type of sand. It's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds because sand has to meet certain spec and you can't find that sand really by itself anywhere. So you have to do a lot of mixing and it's good work. And then we also supply the underground road bed. KGHM Victoria Mine, we do similar services, the site services, the janitorial, we've done some crushing and haulage, a lot of clearing and grubbing on site. So this one's not operational yet. It's still about to hit construction. So a lot of these services are just on surface without the mine operating quite yet. We've done some road construction and we have a master services agreement where, we have equipment available and all the just side projects that they need us to do, we perform. Stobie Mines, it's a very old mine that was opened back up to be an open pit just this past year. And we're working with a company called Tees. It's an Australian company that's operating the mine. It's a 4 valley. And we do all the crushing there. It's about 5,000 tons a day. A couple other projects that we've done. We worked in the tailings area, doing some dam buttressing, erosion control, crushing, and we've also worked at one of their generating stations. These particular projects were very capacity building for us because the group that was overseeing these projects were very stringent on their paperwork for health and safety, and there's a lot of project management that was involved that we didn't necessarily have the capacity for, but we had to learn it quickly and build up our capacity to perform it. Just a couple other projects. I'll keep going. OCL was our first acquisition. So that was the crushing, and they own some quarries and some pits, and it really complemented our construction business. So there's our quarry, one of the pits. We supply the aggregates to the city of Sudbury. And yeah, like I said, they do support our construction company, and we're actually merging the two companies because of how much synergies they have. It makes sense just to have them under one banner. And then Skumuk Legend was a new one for us. We went through a strategic planning session a couple of years ago, and one of the priorities was underground mining to get into this. And we knew what an undertaking it was to build a brand new company. So acquiring a company was, it has a lot of challenges in itself, but it was easier to acquire something with experience and instead of just starting from scratch again. We have 51% stakes, so majority interest, but that's actually going to be increasing to 100% very soon. Skumuk Stuart Olson. This is a 51-49% partnership that we have with a company, and it was to get on the vendor record with Ontario Power Generation. So we formed this partnership. The thought is, Stuart Olson has a lot of expertise in industrial services, basically construction services, and we would be able to perform a lot of the civil work. And this is work kind of all over Ontario. Just a quick overview of our corporate structure now. Sagamuk Nishnabek is our owner. ZEI is the parent company to OCL, Skumuk Construction, and Legend Mining. And yeah, so as of March 2025, we had 157 employees, and I think that's actually grown quite a bit since last month as we gear up for some jobs. We have 49 Indigenous employees right now, which is low for us. I think at our peak, we had about 65 out of 100. But the acquisitions, we acquire non-Indigenous companies, so they didn't have Indigenous employees that come over. And we're working. That's actually a priority of ours to keep adding to our Indigenous content. And we do have somebody now dedicated to training people that building training programs to help bring them onto the workforce. But historically, our construction company had overall had 232 people employed for them over a span of 5 years, and 63% were Indigenous, with 49% being directly from the community. So over 100 of people have actually worked for us at one time straight from the community. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, for sharing with us your journey at Skumuk Enterprises. Now we'll open for the discussion, the Q&A. For those of you online with questions, please either post in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you. But perhaps to start the discussion, we can start with a question for Mark. You shared with us the journey and some of the insights into FNMPC. Do you think this is a model that can be replicated in other countries as well?
It is actually, there are two countries, two are trying to replicate it. Indigenous people in Australia have approached us to try and replicate the same sort of services there, and also certain tribes in the United States are trying to replicate it. Each jurisdiction is different, though. The rights are different, the jurisprudence is different, and how they set it up will be unique to those areas. But yes, it can be replicated. Our mission in here is not necessarily to take a certain level of equity or become partners just owners of companies. It's about changing the way societies see Indigenous people. We have pursued the route of equity because equity is a proxy for respect. And if that's your focus, it can be done different ways, but yes, it can be replicated.
And you mentioned it can be done in different ways, but in terms of establishing a coalition of First Nations, what are some of the key?
The coalition came around because of a very painful failure. It was an opportunity. We had the opportunity, our nations at that time, 30% equity in a $5 billion project, and they couldn't execute. That has focused the attention of many nations in Canada because they don't want to be bypassed like we were in the past. Some of our colleagues here have spoken about in terms of what's happened in Ontario and different places of the world, we as Indigenous people have been an afterthought or not a thought in all these development projects that have happened in the past. Now, with the push towards climate change, the need for new critical minerals, clean energy, we don't want to see that happen again. And this is how we've responded to that. It's you can't come into our territories without leaving something behind for the hosts of these projects. That is something that I think is shared by Indigenous people across the world. We don't want to be an afterthought in our own territories on resources that are of benefit to the greater society.
Thank you. A question in the room, if Jane, to go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jane Koronek from the Trade and Agriculture Directorate. We have a dedicated work stream in the Trade Committee on Indigenous trade and its impacts and potential benefits for Indigenous peoples. I wanted to just pick up on some of this discussion that's happening right here. So, like, these were fascinating examples that we heard of Indigenous investment in major projects, including regional development programs, including with global supply chains, in some cases, implications. Some larger projects, some smaller projects, heavy industry down to kind of, a chocolate and cacao factory. So these are very interesting examples. And I think some of these definitely show the power of the example. I also hear and know that many of these projects are specifically designed because they are treaty-based and they are within a specific context in each country. And I'm wondering how we at the OECD, and this is maybe a question for delegations as well as some of the speakers, how we can best support some of these efforts and how we can, ensure and support that these type of endeavors go beyond the power of the example. So that's my first question. And the second question is maybe specifically to those working on these major projects. I was wondering if we look into international trade. I was wondering if there are any initiatives regarding cross-border trade with other Indigenous tribes or groups or corporations. Whether there is any interest in that, whether that actually goes on. So cross-border intra-Indigenous trade and investment, whether that actually goes on, whether there are specific barriers to that, whether this has happened in your experience, and if not, maybe if you have a sense why that would not have happened kind of organically. Thanks.
So I think for those online as well as Mark, the first question, how can international organizations and these kind of groups support Indigenous involvement in major projects?
Well, also in international trade, the connections of Indigenous people worldwide. I mentioned in my comments that we had been approached by Indigenous people who are starting to find our material online and asking us, how did you do this? How did you replicate? So the first step before even international trade is sharing of information. That's powerful. A comparative example of this being possible is sometimes enough to spark those connections. So, like as I mentioned, we've been approached by Indigenous people in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, South America now. That's the first step. The next step, getting to trade, we have not done that in my nation. I can't speak for my fellow First Nations representatives in Ontario, but it is of interest. Have been in North America. We are one people between Canada and the United States. The border crossed us. We did not cross the border. Like it's an imposition of a colonial structure. So those ties were there in the past. And we would like to get back that today, but we are within nation states. We do look to other nations where Indigenous people are doing a lot more direct exports. New Zealand, for example, winery, dairy, seafood. There are Maori companies who are very active in the world market. We eventually want to get to that point, but we've got a ways to go. So we're aware of it, but we are not doing that in my nation. And perhaps the others can speak to their examples.
Oh, Ismail, online, do you have any thoughts to those questions?
Well, from our perspective, with our case, I think OECDs could be involved on arranging opportunities for having more visibility of this type of project, that many more companies could be partners, and also in working on market access arrangements and with leading some events where we could showcase the products. And I said about chocolate, but the goal of the project is not only chocolate, but many products in food and also cosmetics that can be made out of the forest. And so I think OECD could indeed be much supportive to make this processes we are working there to be widely expanded in a broader territory, and also in cross-border settings, because the indigenous peoples in Venezuela and Bolivia, Colombia, sometimes they are just the same nation, as our colleague pointed. The border crossed their lands, so they face similar problems, and so we could do something that is much bigger than the chocolate factory. Is just a seed of a whole new way to understand Amazonian economy, indigenous peoples, and the forest.
Thank you, Ismail. And we have some questions online as well, perhaps for Will. What are the most significant barriers Indigenous communities face in achieving sustainable economic development, aside from regulatory constraints?
I would say opportunity, opportunity and capacity. I think Sagamuk's been a pretty big success story, but we found the right people and the right opportunities to pounce on. Those opportunities do exist to other First Nations, but they have to. It took us, like I said, 2006 to get almost 20 years to get to where we are now. I don't think it shouldn't take that long for others, because the blueprint is there. Our other speaker kind of laid out a blueprint on how to succeed and build that economic development. Access to capital was a barrier at the beginning, but we had to use a bank who wouldn't give a bank loan for equipment unless the First Nation guaranteed the bank loan, even though we had a healthy contract in place. So those are kind of some of the initial barriers. It's getting started, which is the tough part. You have to really know what you want from the community. Like, do you want to run a business? Do you want jobs? Is jobs a priority, or do you live in an area where there's already high employment? Or do you just want a share of the revenues that come within a share of the resources from your territory? So you kind of have to really plan on what's best for the community, and then strategize from that.
And in establishing that vision and addressing some of the barriers that you just mentioned, what would you say as 2 or 3 of the key actions that your community took?
It was a big risk even starting the construction company. Uh, we could have easily just kept going with our industry partners and let them perform the work and continue hiring members. I'm not sure how much influence I personally had, but that was too boring for me. Let's run a company, and everyone agreed, and we went for it. And it's really, and it wasn't easy at the beginning because even though we had almost the same crew doing the same work, you're a brand new company, and Valley is like a major mining company, and your new company doesn't have any work history. It doesn't have a health and safety record. You really have to build up your reputation by performing the work safely and being able to execute. Some might not get a contract right away the way we did, but the way we were able to expand was, we worked with people that we knew. We got subcontracted on a lot of work, working with others in the industry, just doing smaller jobs. It's just really building that work history and building up the that network with industry that helped us a lot, because there is a lot of people out there willing to help you that way.
Thank you, Will. And maybe we can open up to all the panelists. Another question in the chat is, how have you measured success, and what are the methodologies and tools that you've used to measure your impacts as well?
We measured success through, I think basically we have our 3 important metrics that we focus on mostly, and that's our revenue and profit, our employment of Segmuck people from the community, Segmuck, and Indigenous employees, and as well as keeping up our health and safety. I had to from the beginning. I told our group, our company, I said our 3 priorities have to be, and they can't be changed in this order. 1 is health and safety. Number 2 is execution of the work, and then 3 is benefiting the community. I felt like if we put those in, if we change that order at all, the whole company will fail, and then the benefits that go to the community would be gone. Because if we don't perform well with the health and safety, then companies will stop hiring you in the first place. And you don't want people their livelihoods and their health are more important than the work.
So for us at the coalition, one of our key metrics of success was to get a federal loan guarantee, which lowered the cost of capital for First Nations looking to make equity investments. And that was announced at the floor of our conference last year by the Deputy Prime Minister. It was a $5 billion initial tranche. The current Prime Minister has promised to double it to $10 billion. So for us, that was our mission. That's what we started out with the initial failure by the 11 First Nations. So that's our main objective, and that's our key metric there. The question now is that we are trying to refocus on actually getting projects across the line to approved and built. So one of the first projects is now an electric transmission line in Ontario. Because Indigenous participation was involved in the 50% equity stake, that line was built 1 year early and $15 million under budget, which is quite good for a capital project. We need to see more of those happen, where First Nations actually do close on the equity. So that's our next step.
Thanks, Mark. Ismail, do you have any comments on how you measure success in your project?
Yes. The one way we measure success is the success of the entrepreneurship, the Indigenous entrepreneurship in itself. It's not a common way. Usually they sell raw matter. The economy is based on raw matter and middleman business. And so to be able to run more complex business is one way we measure success. And we work with all the training and opportunities to learn and to get involved on the administration of the factory. Another way is the participatory way. The entrepreneurship is taken like it has to distribute benefits to many or to maximize the benefit among the people in the indigenous people, and also how it will be a model to others. We have seen this already happening on the traditional communities we work with, which are further on this process. And it's interesting how one community learn from the other and start doing things on their own in this logic of, in this rationale of making a high value aggregation out of their resources. So we are, and also forest conservation along the periods. We have a baseline measurement about how the environment is now and how it will be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So those are some key elements we look for, measure the success.
Thank you, Ismael. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for the Q&A, but thank you for all your questions. I'll now turn to Enrique Garcilaso, who is Head of Regional and Rural Policy at the OECD, to provide some closing remarks.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you for all the speakers today, and especially to Canada. Also want to recognize your support for this topic from the outset. Thanks for delegations coming here today. We have Mexico, Costa Rica, and New Zealand. Thanks for colleagues within the OECD from DCD. I'm not sure that colleague on the front, and from TAD. So that's great to have such a turnover. And we had more than 100 people participating. So I think for me, trying to make some conclusions, I like to maybe focus on 3 things that from the examples that we heard. I agree with Jane. There's quite some really inspirational examples. And for me, when having worked with Indigenous development topics, there's a lot of aspirations. But what surprises me now, it's from aspirations to real impact. I think some of the stories that we heard today are success stories. They are market-driven. They show how success is possible from bottom up. And this is very important for us, for other Indigenous communities where it might not be happening. I think you are showing that it is possible and and there's ways to do it. So I think that's a very, very important first element that I'd like to show. We heard a lot about how going from short-term to more long-term impact across different elements, how some of these top-down measures were not really producing unless you have a true bottom-up engagement, Indigenous-led in many cases. Going, for example, from raw materials to global value chains, or focusing on the value chains, going from right holders to shareholders. It surprises me some of the remarks that we heard from Mark of the need to be partners, equity holders, just to get a sense of respect and have this partnership relationship that seems to be quite important. We work a lot on multi-level governance. We like to talk about partnerships across levels of government. So I think there's a lot of similarity from what you have shown us. And I think, this takes me to the second part. Like, what are the elements that I think are important from some of these examples? We heard a lot about the importance of access to technology. I think the Amazon 4.0, how you can really bring high-tech technology in very remote places. I find it like really, really interesting how to do that, how to get access to skills and capacity, financial capacity, ability to negotiate. I think the First Nations also bring a lot of resources, including financial resources, business support, know-how. All of these things are extremely important. But also, I think behind all of these elements, it's there's a willingness to give back to the community. I think it's important that a lot of these, there's a lot of credibility, even of some of the examples that were non-Indigenous owned, they had a good engagement and credibility with the community. It's very important to have these sort of representation and credibility with many of the Indigenous. And I think for us, it's very, very interesting whether these elements are very specific to projects, to countries, to communities, or they can be somehow a little bit more transversal to other areas. So I think that's something for us to reflect and think about. And perhaps just to finalize a little bit, what can we do? I think you asked the right question, Jane. How can the OECD help? First, our first thing is to disseminate. I think it's very important. We play a very important role to do that. We have different connections within Indigenous and non-Indigenous, so create platforms like this is something that we can do. As we're doing, we're trying to deepen that work, build the know-how. I think it's very important to, as some of you know, the work around Indigenous communities is something relatively new within the OECD. There's different parts of the house that are very, very important know-how. So for us, it's also working better together within the different parts of the OECD and then showing that and maybe disseminating it. Create platforms of exchange. I think that's quite important. And that's really for me, it's really inspirational to some of these examples that I saw today. And just getting back to all the participants, you can count with us for helping you with your endeavors, and please feel free to come back to us if you have any specific ideas. But we're here listening and trying to support some of your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Enrique, and thank you to our excellent panelists, those in person and online today, for their insightful presentations. And thank you for those who joined online to watch this webinar and those who continue to support these dialogues. The recording will be posted online on our Indigenous communities website, should you wish to share it with your networks. So yeah, thank you and enjoy your weekend.